greatest show on earth. Richard Dawkins. The greatest show on earth. The evidence for evolution. Chapter 3. The primrose path to macroevolution. Chapter 2 showed how the human eye, working by selective breeding over many generations, sculpted and needed dog flesh to assume a bewildering variety of forms, colors, sizes, and behavior patterns. But we are human, accustomed to making choices that are deliberate and planned. Are there other animals that do the same thing as human breeders, perhaps without deliberation or intention, but with a similar result? Yes, and they carry this book's softening up program steadily forward. This chapter embarks on a step-by-step seduction of the mind as we pass from the familiar territory of dog breeding and artificial selection to Darwin's giant discovery of natural selection. By a some colorful intermediate stage, the first of these intermediate steps along the path of seduction is over the top to co-leader primrose path, take us into the honeyed world of flowers. Wild roses are agreeable little flowers, pretty enough, but nothing to write home about. The terms of one might lavish one, say, peace, or lovely lad, or ophelia. Wild roses have a delicate aroma, unmistakable, but not to swan for, like Memorial Day, or Elizabeth Harkness, or Pregnant Cloud. The human eye and human nose went to work on wild roses, enlarging them, shaping them, doubling up the petal, tinting them, refining the bloom, boosting natural fragrance to heady extremes, adjusting habit of growth, eventually entering them in sophisticated hybridization programs until today. After decades of skillful selective breeding, there are hundreds of prized varieties which with each one evocative and commemorative name. Who would not like to have a rose named after her? Insects were the first domesticators. Roses tell the same story as dogs, but with one difference, which is relevant to our softening of strategy. The flower of the rose, even before human eyes and nose embarked on their work of genetic chiseling, owned by its very existence to millions of years of very similar sculpting by insect eyes and nose, well, antenna, which is what insects smell with. And the same is true of all the flowers that beautify our gardens. The sunflower, Hemiliatus annus, is a North American plant whose wild form looks like as aster and large daisy. Cultivated sunflowers today have been domesticated to the point where their flowers are the size of a dinner plate. Mammoth sunflowers originally bred in Russia and 12 to 17 feet high. The head diameter is close to 1 foot, which is more than 10 times the size of the wild sunflower disc, and there is normally only one head per plant, instead of the many much smaller flowers of the wild plant. The Russians started breeding this American flower, by the way, For religious religion during Lent and Advent, the use of oil in cooking was banned by the Orthodox Church. Conveniently, as for the reason that I, untutored in the profundity of theology, shall not presume to fathom. Sunflower seed oil was deemed to be exempt from this provision. This provides one of the economic pressure that drove the recent selective breeding of the sunflower. Long before the modern era, however, Native Americans had been cultivating these nutritious and spectacular flowers for food, foliage, and decorations, and they achieved the result intermediate between the wild sunflowers and the extravagant extremes of modern cultivars. But before that again, sunflowers, like all brightly colored flowers, owed their very existence to selective breeding by insects. The same is true of most of the flowers we are aware of. Probably all the flowers that are colored anything other than green and whose smell is anything more than just vaguely plant-like. Not all the work was done by insects, but some flowers like pollinators that did the initial selective breeding were hummingbird, bats, even frogs. But the principle is the same. Garden flowers have been further enhanced by us, but the wild flowers with which we started only to caught our attention in the first place because insects and other selective agents had been there before us. Generation of ancestral flowers were chosen by generation of ancestral insect or hummingbird or other natural pollinators. It's a perfectly good example of selective breeding is the minor difference that the breeders were insect and hummingbird, not human. At least I think the difference is minor. You may not, in which case I still have some sharpening up to do. One might attempt us to think it's a major difference. For one thing, humans consciously set out to breed, say, the darkest, most blackish purple rose they can, and they do it to satisfy the ancestral whim, or because they think other people will pay money for it. Insects do it not for ancestral reason, but for reason of, well, here we need to back up and look at the whole matter of flowers and their relationship with their pollinators. Here the background, for reasons I won't go into now. It's of the essence of sexual reproduction, then they shouldn't fertilize yourself. If you did that, after all, there'd be little point in bothering with sexual reproduction in the first place. Pollen must somehow be transported from one plant to another. Hermaphroditic plants that have male and female part within one flower often go to elaborate lengths to stop the male harp from fertilizing the female harp. Pan himself studied the ingenious way this is achieved in primroses. Taking the need for cross-fertilization as a given, how the flowers achieve the feat of moving pollen across the physical gap to separate them from other flowers of the same species. The obvious way is by the wind, and plenty of plants use it. Pollen is fine, light powder. If you release enough of it on a breezy day, 1 or 2 grains may have the luck to land on the right spot in a flower of the right species. But wind pollination is wasteful. A huge surplus of pollen needed to be manufactured. As hay fever sufferers know, the vast majority of pollen grains land somewhere other than where they should. and all their energy and costly material is wasted. There is a more directed way for fallen to be targeted. Why don't plan to choose your animal option and walk around looking for another plant for the same species, then copulate with it? That's a harder question to deal with than you might think. It's circular simply to assert that plants don't work, but I'm afraid that we'll have to do for now. The fact is plants don't work, but animals work. Animals fly, and they have a nervous system capable of directing them toward particular targets with thoughtful shapes and colors. So if only there was some way to persuade an animal to dust itself with pollen and then walk or purportedly fly to another plant of the right species. Well, the answer is no secret. That's exactly what happens. The story is in some cases highly complex and in all cases fascinating. Many flowers use a variety of food, usually nectar. Maybe variety is too loaded a word. Would you prefer payment for services rendered? I'm happy with both, so long as we don't misunderstand them in a human way. Nectar is sugary syrup, and it's manufactured by plants specially and only for fame and fueling bees, butterflies, hummingbird, bats, and other hired transport. It's costly to make, handling up a proportion of the sunshine energy trapped by the leaves, the solar panel of the plant. From the point of view of the bee and hummingbird, it's high energy aviation fuel. The energy locked up in the sugars of nectar could have been used elsewhere in the economy of the plants, perhaps to make a route or to fill the underground storage magazines that we call tubers, valves, and combs, or even to make huge quantities of pollen for broadcasting to the four winds. To the four winds. Evidently, for a large number of plant species, the trade-off works out in favor of paying insects and birds for their wings and fueling their flight muscle with sugar. It's not a totally overwhelming advantage, however, because some plants do use wind pollination. Presumably, because detail of their economic circumstances tip their balance that way. Plants have an energy economy, and as with any economy, trade-offs may favor different options under different circumstances. That's an important lesson in evolution, by the way. Different species do things in different ways, and you often won't understand the difference until you have examined the whole economy of the species.